needs assessment is not only about your trainees, it's also about the thing that you actually have to teach. And we're going to get into how to design a training module and how to actually train and how to structure ideas later. But it's worth noting that once you figure out what they need to know, you need to figure out what that thing is. Because it's really hard to train somebody in a cognitive, affective, or psychomotor way if you don't know how to do it yourself. There are times as a teacher, I'm looking down on the syllabus and I think, crap, I'm about to lecture on this subject and I don't know as much as I should. So I'm off to my books and my textbooks, journal articles, the internet, and I'm gathering information, right? So that I can try to figure out and fit into my head, oh, okay, this is what they need to know, because I need to know it first. So once you figure out what it is that they need, you need to do a thing called a task assessment. And that is basically to assess the task that they need to learn, to try to figure out what the thing is that they actually need to do. And the best way to do that is to write down the thing that they need to learn. So let's say that you've done your rating system and you've decided, you've discovered that there's a lot of people who want to know about coworker relationships. And from your observations in the coffee room, you see that fights breaking out between the coworkers is a regular occurrence. So your observations and the surveys are kind of agreeing with each other. These people know how to deal with each other. So now you have the task, right? So you need to figure out, okay, what does it mean to relate to your coworker, and what does it mean to relate to your coworker in a skilled way? So when you're trying to learn something, learn. I mean, just because you're doing it for training doesn't make learning terribly different. So learn in the ways that you learn, or learn in ways that are better than what you often learn. Figure out, go to the textbooks. Textbooks are a solid way to get structured, laid out description of a task. So what do textbooks have to say? What do other organizations have to say? I am a huge fan of calling people who are older, wiser, more experienced than I am and saying, hey mom, tell me about this. What do you have to say about that? There are people in your lives who are experts at particular things. Call up, do little investigative interviews on your own of the people that you know. Branch out from there. Once you start gathering information, one of the tricky things about training is that training generally happens through time, which is to say that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. You start at one place, move to the next, move to the next, and move to the next. And so you not only need to understand the task, but you need to understand the task kind of in a chronological fashion. There are some weird versions of training where it doesn't all happen chronologically and the people can pick which parts that they want to get involved in, but generally that's not how trainings go. Usually trainings, there's a central messenger and that message is being spread out over time. And so you need to find a way how to break the task down through time. So if you think about something as dynamic as a golf swing, right? A golf swing involves a lot of different components. I'm not that good at golf, right? But there are a lot of different ways of approaching it. You can approach it with a step-by-step process. So one way to break down your task, to perform your task analysis, is to break it down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is particularly good for highly technical skills because they often have beginning, middles, and ends. They have discrete things. You have to perform this before you perform that. So you teach them first how to hold the club, right? Put your thumb here, wrap it around like that. Maybe you first teach them how to put the ball in, whatever, and then hold the club, and then you teach them how to stand, and then you teach them how to draw back, and then you teach them how to hit the club, and then you teach them how to follow through, and you basically run through the 47 steps, all the things that they need to keep in mind, and then hit tips, right? So step by step is one of the ways that you can break it down. Another thing that you can do is you can look at the verbs. Verbs are very important in training because training really, at the end of the day, is about performing things. So what you can do is you can try to describe the process that people need to do using verbs. And you might want to narrow it down to a manageable handful. And then once you have those, then you can kind of focus on them. This is good particularly for, say, communication skills, which don't always break down into step-by-step processes. Sometimes they do, but oftentimes they don't. Oftentimes they're a little bit more broad. So let's say you're talking about leadership. You could break leadership down into a set of verbs, right? So there's relating, envisioning, organizing, and inspiring. You might identify these 4 verbs as the 4 things that a leader performs, right? So I lead through inspiration, I lead through creating actual order, I lead through having a vision, creating a vision, and I lead through creating one-on-one relationships with people, right? And then as the trainer, you could go through each of those once it's broken down and say, okay, here is how you perform the verb to inspire, here are these speaking skills and these, how you actually do it, Okay, here's organizing or structuring, Here's visioning, here's some problem-solving methods and some creativity things, and here's relating, and here's some tips on fostering interpersonal relationships. So there's a verb approach to task assessment. Another way of assessing the task is to kind of create a systems model, which is to say, what is the overall goal of the task, what is the starting conditions, and what are the things that you need to perform to take the starting conditions to the overall goals. The way of thinking about that is input, throughput, output. So what is coming in, what is happening, what's transforming, the throughput, and then what is the desired output. You can think about leadership from an input, throughput, output perspective. So your input is the organization as it is, the uninspired members, the disorganized stuff, people operating with no vision, and poor relationships, poor networks. Okay? So that's what's coming in. The throughput are the things that you do, so in a way that's the verbs, but those are the systems or the methods. And then to try to understand, okay, what are the overall goals, what are the outputs, what am I trying to produce? This is particularly useful because a lot of times the output of an organization is a little tricky. What is the output of McDonald's? What is McDonald's trying to produce? Now the first and easiest answer is hamburgers, right? The goal of McDonald's is to get hamburgers. So we take unchopped up cows, we chop them up, we cook them, and we hand out hamburgers. But let's say they make a bunch of hamburgers. Does that mean that they succeeded as an organization? No, because if nobody buys the hamburgers, then they're screwed. So the real output is money, right? So the input is still unchopped up cows, whole cows, but there's another input, which is customers with money. And so the throughput needs to not only be chopping up the cows and cooking them, it needs to also be attending to the customer's needs so that you can join that chopped up cooked cow with the money of the customer to create what their real output is, which is a satisfied customer through the vessel of a hamburger, which I find disgusting, but that's the real output, satisfied customers. And so sometimes when you look at it purely from what are the employees doing, what are they performing, sometimes you miss that while it's important that the McDonald's people know how to create the hamburgers, or to use a professional example, that your HR division knows all of the legal steps to proper hiring and firing. It's important to know that it's not just them, that there's this a goal-oriented way of thinking about about it. So that's another way that you can look at the task. What are my goals? What are my methods? What am I starting with? And if you find that, you're doing a needs assessment here, if you find that there's wasted input, there's more unchopped up cows out there. If we had better throughput, if we had better organizational processes, we could chop up more cows and feed more customers, right? So sometimes the need falls out of identifying the surplus of input. Similarly, if everybody says, oh, this is the output, this is the output, this is the output, and there's too much focus on the hamburgers, or there's too much focus, say, on the legal component of hiring and firing, you might say, there's more output than just people hired and fired in a way that doesn't break the law. There's also an organization that flourishes, people who like coming to work, people who feel like they've been treated fairly. Those are other outputs that we should concern ourselves with. And those are going to involve other throughputs, right, which are more than just legislative. They would also be interpersonal. A slightly kind of totally different way of thinking about this is from the perspective of virtue. One way that you can break down a task is you can say, what qualities does someone who is excellent at this possess? So if you want to train firefighters, you could say, here's the steps of firefighting. Sit at the firehouse, cook food, make jokes. When the bell rings, run, throw the pants on, throw the coat on, get the helmet on, jump on the fire truck and go, right? So you can break down step by step. You could also break it down by verbs. You can do a systems analysis, but you can also think about it from a perspective of virtue, which is, what would a virtuous firefighter be? Well, what would their virtues be? So you could break down firefighting not from a what does it involve doing, but kind of what does it involve being, right? A good firefighter is one who is fit, is one who is respectable, is one who is courageous, is one who is sensitive to all the different cultures in the city that he or she serves, right? So those might be the quick virtues of a firefighter. And from that perspective, sometimes a needs analysis is, okay, which virtues, in what ways do you excel, and what ways do you need more work? So that's another. The last way of breaking down a task so that you can understand it is to come at it from the perspective of underlying theory. Now, training often involves not underlying theory, but actually how you do the thing, which is often why you get step-by-step analyses or analysis by verbs of the things that they're actually doing. But sometimes it's very important for a trainer to break down the task in a theoretical way. Because theory often reveals parts of an idea that we wouldn't have otherwise thought. So, to give a really simple example, an early theorist of public speaking, Aristotle, said that people are persuaded by three things: logos, pathos, and ethos, right? Logic, emotion, and character. That's a theoretical argument about the nature of persuasion. But it reveals to us other stuff about the task. So there's this idea of persuasion, but Aristotle kind of swoops in and he chunks it up into three easily remembered, easily explainable parts. And I could, if I was giving a training on persuasion, I could break it up. Logos, pathos, ethos. People would have no problem going with me on that. So part of it is that sometimes underlying theory helps us structure our ideas. Sometimes underlying theory reveals things that we would have never thought of. So the extended parallel processing model suggests that people don't respond to fear persuasion. They don't, when they feel fear, they don't respond if they don't feel capable of responding. So if you make someone afraid, but they aren't confident that they know how to follow up, they're not confident that they know how to behave in a way to prevent the thing from getting them, they won't do anything. Instead, they'll try to just be less afraid. So for instance, you could scare the crap out of, say, women about breast cancer, but if you don't show them how they can prevent themselves from dying of breast cancer, then they'll just be upset about it. They won't actually respond. They won't do the things that it takes in order to prevent breast cancer if they don't know how. So, knowing the extended parallel processing model, sometimes that knowing that model reveals to me things about needs, things about training needs. So I work with a homeless youth organization. And one of the things that I find is that people are afraid to go out into the streets and talk to homeless people. Generally, in our society, we don't talk to the homeless. We try to avoid them. We pretend they're invisible. And so it's a thing that creates fear. Now, because I know the extended parallel processing model, one day I realized when I'm thinking about how to train volunteers, oh wait, they're experiencing this fear. If people continue to experience this fear, if they don't feel confident in their ability to respond, then they won't do anything. Instead, they're not going to help. So, knowing that, I know that part of when I train them, I need to make them feel more confident. The extended parallel processing model is a little bit more complex than that, but that's kind of a basic thing that I might draw from it. Wow, I not only need to say, here are the rules of the organization, and here are our practices, and this is what we do. I also need to make them feel like they can make a difference in order for them to actually try. And so, underlying theory sometimes inspires needs that your trainees have. So that's it for task assessment. This is basically the beginning of the needs assessment stuff for this class. Check out the Blackboard video and comment on it. That's what we're going to be discussing this week. And one of your assignments coming up real quick here is you're going to be looking at ways people have performed needs analysis, and analyzed the needs of similar organizations as the ones that you have picked. So that's it for today. Enjoy and get cracking on assignment 1. Pick the organization that you're actually going to assess.